Have you ever experienced that sensation, that persistent irritation you simply cannot alleviate? When an individual wielding minor authority chooses to inflict misery upon your life without any justifiable cause. Well, imagine that amplified by a factor of about 1,000. Add to that a scenic lake I had cherished for 30 years, and a homeowners association president who seemed to have missed her true calling as a feudal tyrant. And you'll begin to grasp the essence of my narrative. It is often said that one cannot overcome bureaucracy, or in this instance, the HOA, yet there are times when, if provoked sufficiently and possessing a degree of expertise, a solution emerges. Ultimately, I was compelled to purchase an entire house merely to regain access to my own lake. Seems utterly irrational, doesn't it? Believe me, the situation was indeed so. Stay tuned. This account of suburban conflict, painstaking investigation, and splendid, hard-won vindication is truly remarkable. The whole affair commenced, as such matters frequently do, with a shift in leadership. Our tranquil Lakeside Meadows community had historically been a place where a tolerant, easygoing atmosphere prevailed. We fulfilled our financial obligations, maintained neat lawns, and for 3 decades, residents whose properties adjoined the man-made community lake experienced largely unrestricted access. My home, an original structure, featured a gradually inclined backyard descending to what was commonly known as the Founder's Path, an unofficial track smoothed by countless families over the years on their way to swim, fish, or simply observe the sunset over the lake. This was not a formally recognized easement, but rather a mutual understanding, a remnant from an era when practical judgment and good neighborly relations took precedence over stringent rules. Subsequently, Brenda Wilkins arrived on the scene. She had relocated approximately 5 years prior to one of the more recent, sizable homes on the development's distant edge. Brenda, to put it mildly, instantly perceived the HOA not as an organization for maintaining the community, but as her own personal domain. She secured her election as president by promising to enhance property values and uphold the covenants, which, in Brenda's interpretation, meant imposing unwelcome regulations that made life difficult for everyone. A woman of a particular age, she was invariably attired in flawless, perhaps overly formal power suits, even during a casual Saturday morning walk. Her blonde, helmet-like hairstyle appeared unaffected by the wind, and a constant frown was engraved on her features, as though she were perpetually detecting an offensive odor. She operated a large, polished black Escalade, a vehicle that appeared to absorb all available light in a parking space, and she brandished her title of HOA president as if it were a monarch's edict. Incidentally, my name is Arthur. I am a retired land surveyor and cartographer. My career has been dedicated to interpreting lines on maps, property limits, and the frequently intricate terminology of deeds and easements. Brenda was unaware that she was on the verge of provoking someone possessing a very specialized skill set. The initial indication of difficulty was discreet. Newly laminated notices began to materialize in the communal spaces, stating, "Strictly no unauthorized modifications to common property. All recreational pursuits require HOA board sanction." Next, rumors circulated at the yearly potluck. Brenda was observed confronting elderly Mrs. Gable regarding the non-compliant bird bath in her front garden, or vigorously gauging the height of Jim Henderson's elas with a tape measure she appeared to conjure from nowhere. The general mood became strained. The Founder's Path developed into her singular fixation. She began to label it an unauthorized encroachment and a potential liability nightmare. I attempted to engage her logically, highlighting its decades of tranquil utilization and the fact that its primary users were the homeowners whose properties directly bordered it. I even retrieved some of my old survey maps from the initial planning stages of the development, which indicated the general intention for lake access in our vicinity, although, confessedly, no formal deed existed for that particular path. Brenda would simply regard me with that patronizing little smile, the kind that prompted one to verify if they had inadvertently attended the meeting in their slippers. "Mr. Davies," she would articulate, her tone saturated with insincere pleasantness. "While I value your historical viewpoint, the covenants are unequivocally explicit. The HOA holds responsibility for all common land, and unregulated access points are simply unacceptable in contemporary times. Insurance considerations, you comprehend? I comprehended perfectly. I recognized she was indulging in an abuse of authority. The ultimate provocation occurred on a Tuesday morning. While I was savoring my coffee on the patio, anticipating an afternoon of fishing, the sound of hammering reached my ears. I proceeded to the border of my land, and there it was. A team of laborers, overseen by Brenda herself, clipboard in hand, gesturing authoritatively, were constructing a 6-foot-tall chain-link fence along the precise surveyed boundary line of the HOA common area. This boundary, while technically situated behind our properties, consequently and cruelly obstructed the founders' path, thereby eliminating the lake access we had treasured for a generation. My spirits plummeted. This was more than a mere inconvenience. It felt like a transgression, a deprivation of something abstract yet profoundly cherished. I challenged Brenda on the spot. Brenda, what on earth do you believe you are accomplishing? I endeavored to maintain a steady tone, but anger was present, a frigid knot forming in my stomach. She turned, her self-satisfied smile firmly fixed. Merely ensuring adherence to regulations, Arthur, and improving security. We cannot permit unauthorized individuals to roam onto HOA property. Can we? This fence will distinctly mark the boundary between HOA land and private land. It serves the welfare of the community. The welfare of the community, I countered, my voice unintentionally escalating. You have just severed access for half a dozen families to the lake they have utilized for 30 years. This path has never presented an issue. Not once. An unapproved path, Arthur, she corrected, tapping her pen on her clipboard. And concerning access, the designated HOA recreational zone and boat launch are located on the lake's far side. A short car journey for anyone truly desiring to enjoy our magnificent facility. The manner in which she uttered "our magnificent facility" caused my anger to surge. The official launch area consisted of a concrete platform adjacent to a parking lot. Unattractive and impractical, particularly for those of us desiring a swift swim or to embark a kayak from our own shoreline. This barrier, this unsightly blemish of metal and wire, represented a declaration of hostilities. My fellow residents were similarly dismayed, though most, being more advanced in age, were more inclined to accept the situation. Whispers of dissent arose, along with a handful of irate telephone calls to the HOA management company, which, predictably, referred all matters to President Brenda. Nevertheless, the fence remained. It stood imposingly, a testament to Brenda's minor despotism, gleaming in the sunlight, seemingly deriding us. That night, I was seated in my study, encircled by my maps and surveying tools. The initial fury had subsided, replaced by a resolute determination. Brenda believed she had triumphed, that her construal of the regulations was definitive. However, I was aware that rules are often complex, occasionally conflicting, and nearly always subject to reinterpretation with sufficient investigation. She had constructed a barrier. I required a point of entry, and if such an entry point was non-existent, I would need to devise a way to create one or, as events unfolded, acquire the property to which it was connected. My previous skills, unused for several years following my retirement, started to reawaken. This was no longer solely about a pathway. It concerned a fundamental principle. It was about refusing to allow an intimidator with a clipboard to control the conditions of my existence. The contest, as the saying goes, had begun, and Brenda Wilkins was entirely oblivious to the capabilities of her opponent. The ensuing weeks passed in a flurry of activity involving archival research, digital information systems, and late-night coffee consumption. My initial step was to examine the complete collection of HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and RS, which I scrutinized with a surveyor's attention to potential loopholes and a homeowner's increasing exasperation. Regrettably, Brenda was technically accurate regarding the common land boundary. The founders' path, cherished as it was, possessed no formal legal status. It represented a permitted encroachment, and as HOA president, she was entitled to secure that perimeter. This constituted a hindrance but not a conclusive loss. If the straightforward approach was obstructed, an alternative path was necessary. I retrieved every plat map available for Lakeside Meadows dating back to its original development in the late 1970s. I then compared these with contemporary county tax maps, aerial imagery, and deed documentation. My study started to resemble a control room for a highly particular and localized property disagreement. My wife, a paragon of patience, would provide me with sandwiches and kindly advise me to rest, but she also noticed the determined look in my eyes, indicating I had discovered a lead. She understood this transcended mere fishing; it was a matter of principle. Meanwhile, Brenda was busy solidifying her authority. She successfully implemented a new collection of aesthetic directives so stringent that our once charmingly varied neighborhood began to resemble a set for a dystopian film. An incorrect hue of beige on one's mailbox constituted a violation. A garden gnome judged overly fanciful resulted in a citation. She even attempted to prescribe the types of flowers permitted for planting. This was sheer irrationality, and it increasingly estranged residents, yet many felt unable to act. They would complain to me across the new fence, but no individual appeared to possess the stamina or the particular knowledge required to confront her within her established domain. My attention became more concentrated. The lake, naturally, was the main feature. The HOA possessed a parcel of land surrounding it, identified as a common recreational zone. Brenda's recently erected fence followed the external perimeter of this parcel, essentially enclosing the entire area. The official entry point she had referred to, the boat launch and modest parking area, was, in fact, situated on the distant shore. However, while I was meticulously examining an old, exquisitely hand-drafted subdivision plat map from 1978, an overlooked item caught my eye. It consisted of a minuscule note, almost a supplemental remark, on one of the parcels directly bordering this HOA common land parcel. However, situated on the interior side of the main community roads loop, this specific lot, number 47, was not a prime lakefront property. Its main street exposure was on a tranquil cul-de-sac, yet its back property boundary directly met the HOA's recreational land parcel near the water's edge. And on this vintage map, a faint dotted line denoted a pedestrian access easement extending from the rear of Lot 47 to the common land. This was intriguing. Exceedingly intriguing. Contemporary digital maps frequently excluded such nuanced historical information. I compared Lot 47 with current proprietorship documents. It was owned by a Mr. James Henderson, Jim Henderson, the very same individual whose ELAs Brenda had meticulously measured. He was an older widower, one of the initial homeowners, recognized for his quiet demeanor and private nature. I had a dim recollection of observing a very ancient, somewhat ramshackle wooden gate in his property's rear fence many years prior, nearly engulfed by dense ligustrum. Could that be the solution? If that gate remained, and if the easement was still legally sound, could it be a possible means of access? A tangible tremor of excitement resonated within me. I undertook an unobtrusive stroll past Henderson's residence. It was an unassuming, older ranch-style house, maintained well but displaying signs of its age. The backyard was spacious, and indeed, peering through an opening in the dense ligustrum hedge at the far end, I could just discern the upper part of a time-worn wooden gate. It appeared as though it had remained unopened for many years. My subsequent action was to confirm the easement. This necessitated a visit to the county records office, a location familiar to me from my professional career. I dedicated a whole afternoon to examining microfilm, retrieving old deed volumes, and following chains of ownership. And there it was, unequivocally stated in the original deed for Lot 47, registered in 1979. Together with a non-exclusive pedestrian easement for access to the community lake recreational area. Said easement being 5 feet in width along the westernmost portion of the rear property line of said Lot 47 for the benefit of the owner of Lot 47, his heirs and assigns. Success. This was not merely some casual pathway. This was a formally documented deeded right. It pertained specifically to Lot 47, and significantly, the term heirs and assigns signified that it passed with the property to any subsequent owner. Brenda's fence, despite enclosing the HOA common land, did not and could not nullify a previously legally recorded private easement providing access to that land from an adjoining private property. Her fence had, in effect, established a private park, and Mr. Henderson, or any owner of Lot 47, potentially possessed a private means of entry to it. I nearly burst into laughter in the stillness of the records room. The exquisite irony of the situation was striking. Brenda, in her fervor to regulate access for all others, had either disregarded or, more probably, been entirely unaware of this minute yet crucial particular. Her fence was intended to prevent entry to the common area from the vicinity of my house and those of my neighbors. But what if an individual could gain access from a completely different, legally incontestable direction? I procured a copy of the deed and the pertinent plat map page, the documents feeling warm in my grasp like a triumphant lottery ticket. The nascent idea began to take shape. What if I became Mr. James Henderson's successor in ownership? The notion was bold. Purchasing an entire residence merely to utilize a gate. It was an extreme measure, frankly somewhat irrational. Yet, the more I contemplated it, the more refined the solution appeared. It was not a matter of confronting Brenda according to her rules, disputing HOA bylaws that she could manipulate to her advantage. Instead, it involved circumventing her completely by employing established property law that existed prior to her tenure and, indeed, prior to the current HOA's excessive assertions of authority. I resolved to seek advice from my old acquaintance and infrequent golf companion, Tom Albright. Tom, a retired real estate lawyer, was exceptionally astute and possessed a delightfully skeptical perspective on HOA political maneuverings. I explained the circumstances over coffee, arranging my maps and papers across his dining room table. He listened attentively, chuckling intermittently as I recounted Brenda's behavior. Upon reaching the part concerning Lot 47 and the easement, he reclined in his chair, a slow smile gradually appearing on his face. "Arthur, my friend," he remarked, "you are a wonderfully cunning individual. This is exquisite. It's like deploying a tactical nuclear weapon in a dispute over a garden sprinkler." He examined the deed and the plat map. The easement appears sound. It is specifically recorded and transfers with the land. Her fence has no bearing on this. If you acquire Lot 47, that gate becomes your personal entryway to her select lakeside haven. We deliberated on the possible complications. Could the HOA attempt to assert that the easement had been relinquished? Improbable, since lack of use generally does not nullify a deeded easement absent additional legal proceedings, which had not occurred. Could they endeavor to purchase the easement? Possibly, but they would need to enter into negotiations with the owner of Lot 47. And if I were that owner, the cost would be considerable, exceptionally so. So, Tom Albright stated, joining his fingertips, the inquiry is Mr. Henderson inclined to sell? That was, in fact, the crucial question, or more precisely, the several $100,000 question. The scheme was no longer a mere inkling, it had become a comprehensively developed, though daring, course of action. Brenda Wilkins considered herself the monarch of the lake. She was completely unaware that an unassuming cartographer was preparing to acquire a portion of her domain, a portion that included its own exclusive access. The sense of irony was so profound it was almost tangible. The initial phase was the most sensitive, making contact with Mr. Henderson. My acquaintance with him was superficial, limited to a courteous nod exchanged when he was engaged in gardening or retrieving his mail. He was a gentleman in his late 80s, a widower, and according to local talk, progressively fatigued by the evolving atmosphere of the neighborhood, especially under Brenda's autocratic control. I wished to avoid appearing like an opportunist seeking to take advantage of an elderly individual, nor did I intend to disclose my complete strategy at the outset. I opted for an understated, neighborly method. I prepared a loaf of my wife's renowned sourdough bread, a recognized conciliatory gesture in our area, and visited his home on a bright afternoon. He responded to my knock, appearing somewhat taken aback, a gentleman with weary eyes. "Mr. Henderson," I initiated Arthur Davies from nearby. "My wife baked some bread and we found ourselves with a surplus loaf. We thought you might appreciate it." He appeared sincerely moved. "Well, now that is exceedingly thoughtful of you, Arthur. Please step inside for a short while if you are able." His residence was impeccably tidy, adorned with old photographs and permeated by the fragrance of lemon polish. We conversed for some time about the climate, the fondly remembered past in lakeside meadows, and the manner in which things once were. Subtly, I guided our discussion toward the recent alterations implemented by the HOA, proceeding with caution. "It is unfortunate about the lake access situation for some residents," I remarked, endeavoring to sound nonchalant. Brenda Wilkins certainly possesses firm convictions regarding how matters should be managed. Mr. Henderson emitted a profound, tired sigh. "Indeed," he stated, his voice soft yet resolute. That woman measured my award-winning elas. Can you fathom it? Claimed they exceeded the new foliage height regulation by half an inch. I've never encountered such a thing in my entire life. He shook his head. And the fence preventing people from reaching the water simply doesn't feel equitable. This presented my opportunity. Actually, Mr. Henderson, I said, I have been conducting some investigation into the original property boundaries and easements pertaining to the lake. Your property possesses a rather distinctive feature. Were you aware that you hold a deeded pedestrian access easement leading directly onto the HOA common land from the rear of your parcel? He regarded me, a hint of something, surprise, perhaps a memory, in his gaze. An easement? Yes, I believe I do recollect some mention of that from when Martha and I purchased this property a long time ago. There is an old gate at the back. I haven't utilized it in what must be 20 years. It's completely overrun with vegetation now. Well, I went on, that easement remains entirely legitimate. Legally speaking, that gate serves as your personal access to the lake area irrespective of any fence erected by the HOA. He contemplated this. So, that meddlesome woman, Brenda, she cannot prevent me from using it if I chose to do so? Not lawfully, no, I affirmed. That right is attached to Lot 47 and consequently to you, its proprietor. I detected a glimmer of defiance in his eyes, a quiet act of resistance against Brenda's excessive authority. During the subsequent weeks, I paid several more visits to Mr. Henderson. We would have coffee together and discuss his deceased wife, his grandchildren, and his exasperation with the progressively aggressive HOA. I came to understand that he was solitary and valued the companionship. Furthermore, he evidently disapproved of Brenda and her methods. He remarked quite casually one day that he had been contemplating relocating to a smaller residence, moving nearer to his daughter who lived in a different state. However, the prospect of selling his home, engaging with real estate agents, and managing viewings was intimidating for him at his stage of life. The elements began to align. This was not solely about my own access to the lake, it had the potential to be an arrangement advantageous to both parties. Eventually, I addressed the matter head-on. Mr. Henderson, I began, selecting my words with deliberation. This may seem somewhat unconventional, but considering your inclination to move and my specific interest in the lake access that your property uniquely possesses, would you contemplate selling your house directly to me? Without involving real estate agents or a public advertisement, just a simple private transaction. Naturally, I would propose a fair market value. He remained silent for a considerable time, gazing out his window at the elas Brenda had so officiously inspected. Then he faced me, an astute expression in his eyes. You genuinely desire that lake access restored, don't you, Arthur? I do, I conceded. And candidly, I also think someone ought to remind President Wilkins that she does not possess the entire globe, nor even this diminutive portion of it. A slow smile appeared on Mr. Henderson's face. You know, Arthur, he remarked. Martha always cherished this home, but she would have detested the recent goings-on in this neighborhood. She would have appreciated the notion of that woman receiving a little shock. He paused. Very well, Arthur, let us discuss figures. If you can present me with a reasonable offer, one that enables me to relocate near my grandchildren without undue complication, then yes, I believe we can reach an agreement. And I would derive a degree of contentment from knowing that the old gate will be utilized once more, particularly if it causes some irritation to Brenda Wilkins. The discussions were friendly and unexpectedly rapid. I conferred with Tom Albright regarding the legal aspects and to confirm the price was equitable for Mr. Henderson while remaining within my financial capacity. This required utilizing funds I had set aside for a long-anticipated journey to Scotland, a sacrifice, yet the prospect of outwitting Brenda served as a potent incentive. It's a difficult thing to accept, Arthur, spending this amount of money to regain something that was ethically yours from the start, my wife had commented, albeit with an encouraging smile. But I haven't observed you this enthusiastic about an undertaking in years. Proceed with it. And so we proceeded. The necessary documents were prepared. Title examinations verified that all was correct, including the invaluable easement. Mr. Henderson was pleased with the offer and the simplicity of the sale. He appeared truly relieved, free from a burden. Throughout these developments, Brenda stayed blissfully unaware, persisting in her oppressive control. She had commissioned new, even more conspicuous signs for her cherished fence, private HOA property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. By order of the HOA president. She had even begun to survey the fence line in her Escalade, gazing into backyards, acting as a self-designated protector of her recently claimed dominion. One afternoon, while I was unobtrusively removing some of the dense undergrowth near Mr. Henderson's rear gate, with his consent naturally, as we were in the process of finalizing the sale, she actually drove past slowly. She lowered her window and called out, "Is everything satisfactory over there, Arthur? Just appreciating Mr. Henderson's quaint appeal, are we?" Her patronizing tone was unmistakable. "Merely taking in the fresh air, Brenda," I responded, offering her my most guileless smile. Oh, if only she were aware. The day of the transaction arrived. Mr. Henderson endorsed the documents, gave me the keys to his residence, and, more significantly, a very old, somewhat corroded key he had discovered in a kitchen drawer. A key he thought belonged to the rear gate. "I haven't laid eyes on this in decades," he remarked, a sparkle in his eye. "I trust it still functions. If not, I am confident a person with your abilities can find a solution." I clasped his hand warmly. "Thank you, Jim, for all of this. I hope you find pleasure in being nearer to your family." "I shall, Arthur," he replied. "And you make sure to enjoy that lake, and convey my best wishes to Brenda," he added with a knowing wink. I was now the gratified, albeit somewhat financially strained, proprietor of Lot 47. The residence itself was unpretentious, somewhat old-fashioned, yet structurally sound. I had no immediate intentions of relocating there. My own house was merely a few blocks away. For the time being, Lot 47 represented a tactical procurement, a very costly means to a very particular end. My initial action, even prior to organizing the transfer of utility services, was to proceed to the rear of my newly acquired property. The old wooden gate was certainly present, concealed within the ligustrum, nearly undetectable from afar. It was fastened with a basic, traditional padlock. I retrieved the key Jim had provided. It resisted at first, but with some manipulation, it inserted into the lock. I held my breath and rotated it. A click and a scraping noise followed, and the shackle released. My heart gave a slight jump. I opened the gate. It groaned in objection, rigid from prolonged inactivity, yet it yielded, and beyond it stretched the HOA common land, the tidally mown grass sloping towards the shimmering lake water. Brenda's formidable chain-link fence extended parallel to my new rear property boundary, merely a few feet distant. However, my gate provided access to the very land she had enclosed. I had succeeded. I had purchased my return to the lake. The delightful clandestine nature of this achievement was almost overwhelming. I secured the gate, relocked it, and dedicated some time to further clearing the undergrowth, rendering the gate and the pathway leading to it from the house somewhat more easily passable. I also lubricated the hinges slightly. My intention was for it to open effortlessly when the opportune moment arrived, the moment of disclosure. This would necessitate meticulous preparation. The event had to be public, impeccably synchronized, and above all, it had to be an occasion Brenda Wilkins would remember for the rest of her life. The ensuing weeks became a delightful practice in forbearance and discreet groundwork. I proceeded unhurriedly. I desired the unveiling to be flawless, a harmonious expression of justified triumph. I dedicated several weekends to my recently purchased property, Lot 47, purportedly performing minor upkeep. I cut the grass and pruned the hedges, which involved tidying the vicinity of the vital rear gate to appear orderly and deliberate. I went so far as to substitute a few decayed planks on the gate and apply a new layer of modest brown stain, verifying that the old padlock continued to operate flawlessly with Mr. Henderson's key. This work naturally attracted some attention. Brenda, perpetually watchful, would sometimes drive past in her Escalade. I would offer a cheerful wave. On one occasion, she actually paused and, from her driver's seat, inquired, "So, Arthur, I understand you've purchased poor old Mr. Henderson's property. Intending to resell it quickly, are we?" Attempting to capitalize on the surge in property values I've engineered. Her voice was imbued with that recognizable mixture of distrust and condescension. "Merely a small investment, Brenda," I answered calmly. "A delightful little place, and remarkably close to the lake's conveniences, once you manage to access them." I directed a meaningful look towards the far-off official boat ramp. She merely scoffed, evidently uninspired, and departed. If only she comprehended how proximate, and by what means I intended to reach them. My attorney friend, Tom Albright, was almost euphoric with expectation. "You must choose your timing carefully, Arthur," he would counsel during our now frequent strategic coffee discussions. "Ensure it is dramatic. Ensure it has an impact." I was also discreetly preparing a few of my long-standing neighbors, those most distressed by the fence. I refrained from disclosing the entire scheme, merely suggesting that I was investigating some historical property entitlements and that matters might not be as straightforward as Brenda perceived. This generated a small current of optimistic conjecture. The ideal occasion arose more quickly than I had anticipated. Brenda, with her characteristic sagacity and appetite for self-promotion, declared the inaugural annual Lakeside Meadows Lake Appreciation Day. It was planned as an HOA-funded gathering, scheduled for a Saturday on the common land adjacent to the lake, the precise area she had so victoriously barricaded from a significant number of us. The event would feature hot dogs and an inflatable play structure for children if any parents ventured to bring them into Brenda's sphere of influence. Furthermore, according to the promotional leaflet distributed to every mailbox, there would be a special speech delivered by HOA President Brenda Wilkins concerning the responsible stewardship and enhancement of our community's premier natural asset. The irony was nearly overwhelming. She was commemorating the lake she had rendered unreachable for half the residents on the very land she had enclosed. This was the moment. This was the perfect setting. The Saturday designated for Lake Appreciation Day began clear and sunlit. I could discern the indistinct noises of a public address system being assembled while I sipped my morning coffee on my own patio, gazing longingly at the unreachable water. About noon, I observed families beginning to make their way towards the official entry point on the lake's opposite side. I bided my time. I desired spectators. Around 1 p.m., when I estimated the festivities would be at their peak and Brenda would probably be commanding attention, I initiated my plan. I attired myself informally in khaki shorts, a polo shirt, and a fishing hat, carrying my old tackle box on my shoulder and a fishing rod in my hand. I drove to Lot 47, parked in its driveway, and entered the house. I traversed the silent rooms, a slight smile on my face, then exited through the back door into the yard. The noises from the gathering were more distinct here, subdued music, children's excited cries from the inflatable castle. And then, clearly, Brenda's amplified voice commencing her special speech. Impeccable timing. I proceeded serenely to my recently renovated gate at the property's rear. I produced Mr. Henderson's old key. It inserted into the padlock effortlessly now. With a gratifying click, the lock disengaged. I opened the gate. It moved without a sound on its lubricated hinges. And I passed through from my private land directly onto the HOA's select lakeside common ground, precisely into the center of Brenda's carefully organized event. I ambled unhurriedly over the grass toward the lakefront, approximately 50 yards from where Brenda stood on a diminutive, temporary platform, microphone in hand, delivering a speech to an audience of about 30 or 40 individuals. A small number of attendees, primarily those positioned at the edges, were the first to see me. A child indicated my presence. A low hum of conversation spread through the assembly. Brenda, in the midst of a statement concerning financial prudence and restricted entry, hesitated. Her eyes, slightly enlarged by her reading spectacles, shifted towards the unforeseen motion. She perceived me. Her mouth fell open in astonishment. The microphone tilted in her hand, producing a short burst of audio feedback. For an instant, a shocked quietness prevailed, interrupted only by the remote drone of the inflatable castle's generator. Then Brenda recovered her speech, and her tone was far from pleased. "Arthur Davies," she exclaimed shrilly into the microphone, all semblance of presidential composure disappearing. "What on earth do you believe you were doing? How did you gain entry? This zone is reserved for approved residents participating in this function. You are trespassing." The attendees turned to observe. I simply grinned amiably, rested my fishing rod against a tree, and opened my tackle box as though getting ready to prepare a lure. "Good afternoon, Brenda," I called out brightly. "A splendid day for this activity. Wouldn't you agree? I thought I would test my fortune. The base ought to be active near those reeds." "Trespassing," she shrieked once more, her complexion becoming an intriguing shade of puce that contrasted dreadfully with her turquoise trouser suit. "I will have you ejected." "Security. Oh, just a moment. We lack security personnel because this is meant to be a restricted zone." She was agitated, entirely deviating from her prepared remarks. Two of her board member associates, A man named Gary with a nervous appearance and Brenda's constantly discomposed secretary Carol began to approach me with uncertainty. "Mr. Davies," Gary initiated. "President Wilkins is accurate. This is an HOA occasion, and that barrier." He motioned vaguely. "Ah, the fence?" I remarked, nodding with wisdom. "Indeed, a most formidable fence, Brenda. It certainly prevents entry. For most individuals, at least." I then faced my gate, which remained open, and indicated it. "But you observe, this specific gate, this entrance, my friends, is situated on my land, lot 47 to be exact, which I currently own. And this gate," I rattled the old key, "is opened by my key. It offers direct deeded access to this charming common area, in accordance with the original plat map and easement documented back in 1979. I've been intending to do some fishing." Brenda was stammering. "Your property? Your key? That's absurd. That is HOA land. I commissioned that fence myself." "You did have a fence erected along the HOA boundary, Brenda." "Unquestionably," I concurred. "However, it appears you neglected the pre-established, legally documented pedestrian access easement that advantages Lot 47. This easement permits the proprietor of Lot 47, which is now me, to enter and exit this common land at his discretion. I possess the deed, the survey map, and a highly competent lawyer, should you wish to deliberate on this matter more. Tom Albright conveys his compliments." Incidentally, upon hearing Tom's name, an attorney recognized for his directness and intolerance of foolishness, Brenda visibly blanched. Several of the long-standing residents in the audience, those familiar with the history and who had endured Brenda's recent pronouncements, began to smile. A few even emitted quiet, suppressed laughs. "This is an outrage," Brenda finally articulated, her voice shaking with anger. You cannot simply purchase a house to circumvent HOA regulations." "Actually, Brenda," I stated, maintaining a light and informal tone, "I can and I have. You constructed a barrier. I merely acquired the entrance and the property to which it is affixed. Entirely lawful, entirely legitimate." I then demonstratively cast my fishing line, unbaited naturally as I had no real intention of fishing at that moment, into the lake. Now, if you will pardon me, I think President Wilkins was midway through a very significant address concerning lake stewardship. Please, do not let me disrupt you. The subsequent breakdown was magnificent. Brenda appeared as if she might instantaneously ignite. She stuttered. She gestured wildly. She implored her perplexed board members, who were now gradually retreating, evidently wishing to disassociate themselves from the situation. She even produced her phone and dramatically threatened to contact law enforcement. "Please do, Brenda," I responded serenely. "I am certain they would find it very informative to examine my property deeds and the county plat maps. I have copies available if that would be of assistance." She recognized her defeat. The legal terminology, the composed assurance in my voice, the reference to Tom Albright, all these factors combined to diminish her confidence, much like a deflated inflatable castle. Her lake appreciation day was utterly spoiled. The sole topic of conversation was Arthur Davies and his remarkable gait. She muttered something regarding unbelievable impudence and consulting the HOA attorney without delay, then virtually bolted from the temporary platform, her turquoise trouser suit a vivid flash of irate departure. The festive mood dissipated, supplanted by a murmur of animated conversation and astonishment. A number of my longtime neighbors approached to offer their congratulations, shaking my hand, some with tears of mirth in their eyes. "Arthur, you are a true legend, my friend," Peterson declared. "I haven't witnessed Brenda displaying that particular hue since someone planted petunias instead of pansies. The most satisfying aspect was that her fence remained, a testament to her misjudgment. Yet now a completely lawful and private passage existed through it, my passage." And Brenda Wilkins understood with a growing, appalled realization that her dominion over the lake had effectively concluded. The consequences following Lake Appreciation Day were rapid and, for Brenda, severe. Her power, founded on aggressive assertion and the scrupulous application of trivial regulations, disintegrated once individuals observed she could be overcome not by violating her rules, but by comprehending more ancient and basic principles, property rights. Naturally, she conferred with the HOA attorney. Word reached me through informal channels our neighborhood had become a rich source of information that the attorney, subsequent to examining the documents, copies of which I had gladly supplied through Tom Albright, essentially informed Brenda that her legal position was untenable. The easement was unassailable. My proprietorship of Lot 47 was beyond question. The gate belonged to me and my right of passage was unconditional. Her sole option was to attempt to purchase the easement from me. And I believe everyone understood what my demanded price for such a transaction would be, something akin to an eternity and then some. Brenda attempted to gather her residual backing on the HOA board. She convened an urgent board session. The meeting's purpose was ambiguously described as addressing pressing issues concerning common area security and access. A number of us, myself included, now an interested party with distinct concerns about common area entry, ensured our presence. The meeting took place in the community clubhouse, an impersonal space that suddenly seemed filled with expectant tension. Brenda, appearing somewhat worn despite her typically crisp clothing, endeavored to portray my conduct as a form of sinister exploitation of a loophole, a danger to the stability and integrity of lakeside meadows. She mentioned unforeseen repercussions and the underlying intent of the regulations. Mr. Davies, she declared, her voice taut with restrained fury, gesturing with a trembling finger in my direction, has intentionally bypassed the evident purpose of the HOA's security protocols for his own private advantage. Prior to my having a chance to reply, elderly Mrs. Gable, the resident whose bird bath had been cited as a violation, rose, her voice unexpectedly firm. Intent, Brenda? For 30 years, the intention was for those of us residing near the lake to utilize it. You are the individual who arrived and altered everything, erecting that unsightly fence and beginning to regard us as offenders in our own community. Arthur, in this instance, merely discovered an ingenious, lawful method to reinstate a measure of practical judgment. I, for one, commend him. A scattering of applause erupted. Brenda's expression hardened. Additional residents voiced their discontent, expressing their own complaints regarding her authoritarian methods, the incessant flow of violation warnings for minor infractions, the pervasive climate of suppression she had fostered. The gathering resembled less an HOA board session and more a public vote on her leadership. Her supporters on the board, Gary and Carol, appeared progressively uneasy, averting their gaze from her. They perceived that the prevailing sentiment had shifted. Brenda contended that my gate now presented a fresh security hazard. How can we ascertain whom Mr. Davies will permit through his personal gate, she insisted. It compromises the whole objective of the fence. Brenda, I responded composedly, my gate is located on my private land. Whom I permit onto my private land, and consequently through my private deeded easement, is, quite frankly, my own affair. Nonetheless, I continued, recognizing a chance, I am a person of reason. I comprehend that some of my long-standing neighbors, original proprietors who appreciated the lake for decades prior to your fence, feel as wronged as I did. Perhaps a more congenial arrangement could be devised for them. An arrangement that does not entail providing a key to the entire community, but rather guarantees that those who were unjustly deprived of access can once more appreciate the water. I had no intention of granting unrestricted passage. However, the inference was plain. I could exercise discretion, and Brenda would possess no authority in the matter. This enraged her further, the idea of me regulating access, but it also served to isolate her more completely. The board meeting concluded without any favorable outcome for Brenda, only a distinct realization that her backing had vanished. During the subsequent weeks, I did, in fact, establish a procedure. I communicated with the approximately half-dozen original homeowners whose unofficial lake access had been severed by Brenda's fence. I clarified that although the gate was situated on my property and the easement belonged to me, I was prepared to furnish them with a key to the padlock, a duplicate of Mr. Henderson's old key, subject to a straightforward written accord stipulating personal use only. The agreement stipulated no large gatherings, respect for the land, and an understanding that this was a courtesy I was offering, not an HOA-approved entitlement. They were ecstatic. It was not the former, entirely unrestricted founders' path, but it was legitimate access, unhindered by Brenda. The spectacle of elderly Mr. Puffer W. Peterson proceeding towards the lake with his grandchildren and fishing equipment, utilizing my gate, consistently brought a smile to my face. Brenda's endeavors to discover an alternative method to obstruct me were unsuccessful. She evidently investigated the possibility of the HOA condemning the easement, a preposterous notion. The associated legal expenses and required justification would have been immense. She attempted to persuade the HOA to enact new regulations concerning secondary entry points to common areas. Once more, such rules could not supersede a pre-established deeded right without my agreement or a substantial financial settlement. She was in an untenable position. Her magnificent, costly fence remained in place. However, it now stood as a representation of her powerlessness, with an unambiguous, entirely lawful breach in its fortifications, an opening that only a limited number of individuals, designated by me, could utilize. The setback clearly affected her. The sharp tailoring of her trouser suits appeared to lose its definition. The escalade was observed less frequently on its surveillance rounds. She grew more subdued at HOA meetings, and her declarations lacked their former vigor. The subsequent spring, during the annual HOA election, Brenda Wilkins chose not to seek re-election for the presidency. Indeed, she did not even participate in the meeting. Several months later, a for sale sign materialized in front of her substantial residence on the development's far side. Rumor had it that she was relocating to a different, more select gated community, likely one where she could be confident that all entry points stayed securely under the management of the authorities in charge. On the day her moving vehicle departed, a subdued cheer arose from many of the established residents. The house I purchased, Lot 47, transformed into my personal lakeside sanctuary. I did not sell my initial residence. I appreciated both. I would pass afternoons at Lot 47, tending to the garden, or occasionally just sitting near the gate, savoring the peaceful contentment of my triumph. The gate, previously a neglected remnant, evolved into a quiet emblem within the neighborhood, a symbol of tenacity, of the strength derived from understanding one's entitlements, and of the reality that even the most firmly established intimidator can be overthrown with some investigation. A degree of bravery and, in my situation, the tactical purchase of a modest, unostentatious house possessing a highly significant key. The HOA, guided by new, more sensible leadership, in due course even relaxed some of Brenda's more severe aesthetic regulations. A spirit of community started to re-emerge in lakeside meadows. The founders' path officially stayed obstructed by the fence, a mark of Brenda's tenure, yet my gate offered a polite, organized option for those who had suffered injustice. And that, essentially, is the narrative of how I acquired a house to open a gate and by doing so contributed to reinstating a degree of rationality and equity to our community. It serves as a reminder to never misjudge a reserved individual equipped with old maps and a profound commitment to fairness. At times, the most successful method for addressing someone who erects a barrier is not to demolish it, but merely to discover one's own entirely lawful passage through it. Such HOA conflicts are not uncommon in this unpredictable world. It is wise to remain knowledgeable, scrutinize details, and never hesitate to champion what is correct, even if that involves pursuing a less direct and sometimes costly path.